Hi, I'm Dave Rossum. I'm here with Rossum Electro, and we're at Superbooth, and I wanted to show you about the new modules that we've come out with this year. We've actually come out with 3 modules. I'll start over here with Trident. Trident is an oscillator. It's a triple oscillator. It's a Dave Rossum oscillator, so it's very stable. It's very accurate. And at its simplest, you can turn off the sync in the track, and you'll end up with just 3 different oscillators that you can use completely independently. But the power of Trident is in something we call Zing modulation. So let me first tell you about the individual oscillators, and then we'll learn about Zing modulation. So, as I said, Trident has 3 oscillators. The top oscillator, which we call the carrier oscillator, is a fairly simple basic VCO with 3 independent outputs. Right now on the scope up here, we've got a triangle wave, variable frequency of course. We also can get a sawtooth wave. By the way, all of the waveforms here are absolutely perfect. You put them on a really good oscilloscope, take them up 20 kilohertz, they'll still be perfect. No little glitches in them and things like that you'll see with just about every other oscillator. And then we've got a variable width pulse. The pulse waveforms in the oscillators can go all the way to 0 and 100%, which can also be useful if you aren't using the pulse waveform. You can use it as a source of +5 or -5 volts. If instead we go and look at the modulation oscillators, they're a bit different. Let me actually do something slightly different here. There we go. I've got a pulse waveform. The modulation oscillators have the same basic idea of the waveforms, a triangle, a sawtooth, and a pulse. But here you select an individual waveform. There's only one output jack. But the twist that you're trading off for here is we have variable symmetry. The triangle waveform, let's listen to this one now as we do it. You can hear the change in timbre as you change the symmetry. Similarly, the sawtooth, nice sawtooth buzz, but as we change the symmetry, we put a little kink in the waveform. Fairly subtle effect on the timbre when you listen to the waveform itself. When we get into Zing modulation, you'll find it does a lot more there. And then, of course, pulse width modulation as well. So those are the separate oscillators. But as I was saying, the reason I really built Trident, the Zing modulation is akin to ring modulation. Ring modulation is the multiplication of 2 waveforms, but Zing modulation adds 2 other things to that. The first is that Zing modulation is controllable. You don't just plug it in and get what you get. You can take it from 0 effect to a full effect, and that's voltage controllable. And the second thing is I force the oscillators to be synchronous when we do Zing modulation. When we do ring modulation, you get sum and difference frequencies. That works pretty well if it's a subtle effect or the frequencies are close to each other, but you get them way far apart and it just sounds aharmonic and kind of science fiction sounding. When we synchronize the oscillators, that forces all of these harmonics to be within the Fourier series of the carrier oscillator. And the result there is that rather than getting wild variations in aharmonics, we just get wild variations in the harmonic spectra. In other words, changes in the timbre. And you can go from the very subtle to the really quite wild. So let's look at the triangle wave over here. As I begin to bring up the Zing modulation of the modulation oscillator, and I'm going to be modulating it with another triangle wave, we begin to get some curvature in the waveform. Let's listen to it as we do it. Quite a nice timbral shift as we change the amount of Zing. Now let's try changing the frequency of the modulating oscillator. Now let's fiddle with the symmetry of the triangle wave. We also can play with the phase of the synchronization. Only on the second modulation oscillator is this feature available. All of these are just these wonderful little timbral variations. Switch over to sawtooth. Now a brighter modulation sound. And that symmetry on the sawtooth now. Another really interesting kind of thing. Play with the phase a little bit. We have two modulation oscillators so we can zing the thing twice. Get nice format-like tones. And all of these track the frequency of the fundamental perfectly well, but you don't get any craziness as you sweep it around. So you can use it as a basic waveform. So that's a quick tour of Trident. Let's turn down Trident now and move on to our next module. Panharmonium was released at the Synthplex about a month and a half ago, and it's a completely different kind of module. I'm going to have it connected to an assimilator over here, just playing a little demo segment of music from the Cars 1980. And right now what we're listening to is the dry mix of it. This is the original signal. As I turn it up to wet, we'll listen to Panharmonium's resynthesis of that. Panharmonium has two sections in it, an analyzer section that listens to the sound, determines what sine waves there are in it, and identifies the sine waves. The second half is the resynthesizer. It's a bank of 33 different oscillators, and it follows the results of the analyzer, but there's all kinds of things you can modify in it. So for example, now that we're listening to it, we could shift the pitch of those oscillators. We can shift it by octaves as well. We can change the number of oscillators that we're using. Right now I've got 33 of them. As I begin to fade them out, we'll follow less and less of the memory. Now we switch over to a voice track here.
Hello again, hello again, hello again.
I can turn down the number of voices. It's really quite amazing how intelligible the voice is, even with as few as 4 oscillators doing this. Now, one of the things about the analyzer, it takes a little while to analyze it, so we take slices of the sound and analyze them, and you can control the slice rate. You can either adjust it in the module, you can tap in a tempo, and now you can hear distinctly the different analysis phases that you do it. Or you can put in an external clock, and we put out a clock, so if you want to synchronize the rest of your synthesizer to the slice rate, you can do so. I'm going to speed it up a little bit here, but let's listen to some of the things we can do in the transition between the frames. Let's blur them, which means we're going to extend the envelope of each one. And we can even get very extreme in the blur and literally just freeze the spectrum. I can also do that with a freeze button over here, and we can save that spectrum in a memory and use that in a performance to control other sound. The other thing we can do, instead of blurring between them, we can cause the oscillators to glide from one frame to another. Yeah, well, you're in the overlap between the frames. We're taking the oscillators slowly to another one, so it really does fun things to the sound. And then finally, we've got the feedback control. That'll take the result of the resynthesizer and feed it back into the analyzer. Let's go up to a faster slice rate here. Turn that up. Now, if I've got just the unit pitch range, it sounds mostly like an echo. But if I change the pitch ratio a little bit, and if I turn the feedback all the way up, maybe do some fun things like changing the waveform of the oscillators over here, and then just take away the input, Zing just takes on sort of a life of its own. Yeah. We also have control of the analyzer bandwidth, so I can make it analyze just a little portion spectrally of the sound, or I can take a notch out of the middle of the sound. All of these parameters are voltage controllable, and you also can save the entire state of a front panel in a preset. That goes into non-volatile memory, so you can use that as a performance. So, pretty wild stuff. Every time I plug a different sound into this, you have different things that sound neat. I've never failed to find something that was really wonderful with any of the sounds. Even you just plug a plain oscillator into there, it does wild stuff to it. Now the final module I've got was just introduced at the Superbooth yesterday. It's called Linnaeus, and it's a state variable filter, but a very special kind of state variable filter. So let me switch the patch around slightly here, and now we can see the waveform. So right now we've just got a sawtooth waveform coming through the filter. It's configured as a low-pass filter with a high cutoff, so it's not doing anything to the filter. As I take frequency down, let's listen to this now. And we're just going to low-pass filter it. Now the fun thing about state variable filters, they're very resonant, and this one is no exception. So as I start turning up the resonance, now, the state variable filter, it's a stereo filter. Right now we're listening to it in stereo, but I'm just putting a mono signal into it. The output response can be low pass, band pass, high pass, a notch filter, or a shelving filter, and it's continuously variable between those. And we can control the left and the right channel output response independently. So I can set the left response to low pass and turn the control off for it. Now change the high pass response more to a notch type of filter up here. Independently control this. Similarly, the attenuverter over here is also independently controllable, so I can sweep those two around in tandem. I can just affect the left side but not the right, or I can even invert it so that the knob moves the filter responses in opposite directions here. So you can get nice stereo effects using these response controls up here. But the very special thing about the Linnaeus filter is the fact that it's modulatable not only exponentially in frequency, but also linearly in frequency. Linnaeus contains a modulation oscillator inside it specifically for that purpose. And when we modulate it linearly, we get really interesting effects on the resonance because we're modulating the frequency of the resonance at audio rates. Let's turn it up, but I've got the modulation oscillator very low right now. So that gives an interesting special effect. But if I take the modulation oscillator up now to a related rate, we get very nice timbral effects on that resonance. If I take the modulation frequency up even higher, FM type of sounds. Now, it's a filter, not an oscillator, so what I've done so far is pretty similar sounding to thru-zero FM oscillators. So let's crank our sawtooth up now into a real audio frequency type of sawtooth. And now turn up the modulation index while we're modulating. getting at some of the ideas of doing the linear FM where you're in synchronism with your excitation rather than your resonance. So there's a lot of possibilities here. I haven't played around since I've only had the module released for a couple of days, but it's really been a lot of fun discovering the things you can do. So that's a quick tour of our 3 new products. Thanks for listening.